My name is Mahima Bhalla and I'm a special education teacher. I've started an Instagram blog by the name of Value Ed or Valued to talk about diversity and inclusion in learning.
Hi everyone, I'm Vrinda Loiwal.
Join me for my 7-part series with fomonomore. See you there.
All right. Good evening. My name is Vrinda Loiwal, and it is my pleasure to be here on fomonomore with all of you tonight. Welcome to this amazing talk today. I am an educator and I'm the founder of Center for Social Emotional Learning. We are a learning design company focusing specifically on social and emotional skills. And today I have with me a very, very special guest. This is Mahima Bhalla. Mahima is a special education teacher and a learning designer based in Delhi, India. She has various degrees. She has a master's in human development. She has a master's in education technology from Harvard. And she is on her journey to implement inclusive education. And today, she will be talking about what that means. So, Mahima, I am so excited to be here with you. I have seen your work on your blog, Value Ed. By the way, listeners, if you're on Instagram, do follow her blog. It's called Value Ed. It is mind-blowing. Now, over to you, Mahima. Tell us about how you got interested in this field and what is this field?
Sure. Hi, Vrinda, and hi, everyone who's watching us. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you tonight. And also thank you to fomonomore for providing us with this platform to talk about something that is very close to my heart and something that I'm working towards every day. I'm very excited. I am also a little nervous because it's the first time I'm doing such a live, but I have Vrinda with me. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation and to interacting with you all who might be viewing our live tonight. So I will talk about my journey towards inclusive education and why I got in here. But before I come to that, I want to first start off by giving you 3 scenarios. And I will talk about 3 student experiences which are very common, not just in Indian schools, but around the world, I'm sure. So let's start by picturing these 3 scenarios. The first one is, picture a 4th grader who loves going to school, who enjoys learning, who loves interacting with others, sharing ideas. But one day, all of a sudden, he is found crying in the middle of the night because he is not feeling welcomed at school, because he feels that his teachers do not understand him and do not support him or provide him with what he needs. Scenario 2, a 10th grader shares with his teacher that he has never loved school. He has never enjoyed learning. He does not care about learning. He does not care about grades. He doesn't have friends at school. And he has never, ever had a favorite teacher, never in his entire school life. And a 3rd scenario where a college student in this present time of online learning is unable to access video conferencing or online learning because they're hard of hearing. Now think of these 3 scenarios. In all these 3 cases, the students may not feel as successful. They may not feel as supported or welcomed by their teachers or peers or their school environment. These are just a few examples of the kind of learners that I've been working with and supporting throughout my 5 to 6 years of professional experience. But these represent the experience of, I think, millions of learners around the world. And I would say that these are those students who may have different learning needs, may have disabilities, or as we often call those with special educational needs. And therefore, they tend to typically stand out in a traditional education system or in a regular or a mainstream school, as we call it. So ever since I started working as a special education teacher, I have witnessed so many such scenarios where my students were not included, they were not understood, or their needs were neglected or not met in a typical classroom. And I think that sort of really forms the motivation behind everything that I do, and everything that I'm working towards. And I think I try to just remind myself of these learners' experiences and the struggle that they face so that I can work towards this consistently. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, Mahima, can you help us understand within one child's life, what does having a different learning need look like? Can you maybe share an example or paint a picture for us? What does it look like?
So typically, students who have a disability, say in the area of learning or attention or any other developmental disability, it can often impact the way they learn. And what happens is that, so in typical education systems, we have an idea of or a perception of how students learn. That is, in our mind, we think there is a normal way or an average way of how students learn. These
Right.
students who have disabilities or different learning needs may not typically fall into that average.
Okay.
And what that can mean is a class, say a fourth grader, may not be reading at the fourth grade level. So he might be sitting in a fourth grade class, but say because of his, say, learning disability such as dyslexia or ADHD or anything else, he may actually be reading at a first grade level or
Okay.
may have trouble writing.
We're taking an example of a fourth grader who is not able to read a fourth grade text because of a learning disability, let's say dyslexia or ADHD.
Yeah.
And he's
Yeah.
learning, his ability to read is only at a first grade level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Possibly, could be. Yeah. So that's just one scenario. Every disability can impact students differently. So for some, it could be difficulties in terms of learning, in terms of reading skills, in terms of writing skills, mathematics, or just accessing, or just the way how they perceive and access information, how they understand information, how they express themselves, or how they develop socially. So it could manifest in various ways. But what that simply means is that these learners may not be performing at the expected level. So say if we have certain goals, like fourth graders by the end of fourth grade should be able to read this much, should be able to write this much. These kids may not be performing at that level for whatever reason.
Okay.
Yeah. Simply put, I would say, in my mind, they learn differently. I don't necessarily see that as a disability. I would see that as a different learning need.
Beautiful. So you're also showing us that different children have different learning needs, and it does not necessarily mean that it's a disability that they have.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And so what is life like for this fourth grader who cannot read at the fourth grade level? Like, what is he feeling? What is he thinking when he's sitting in this classroom with other fourth graders who can read?
So typically in my experience, if such a student is attending a traditional education system where, say, the curriculum is very rigid, or what we often call as a one-size-fits-all curriculum, where we have one goal for everyone, we have one textbook for everyone, we have one worksheet and one way to assess the child, one way of testing the child. In such systems, because there is a pressure to perform at the expected level, and
Right.
many a times teachers who may not be as responsive to the child's needs or may end up, making the child feel like they are different, or
Okay.
like there's something not okay with them, or they're not good enough. And I've personally experienced or seen these kids who many a time end up thinking that they are stupid or dumb or not good enough And when they're in class, they have been given this, this worksheet or this textbook, which is at a level that they cannot read, they cannot comprehend. Yet everyone else around them seems to do it fluently, right? And imagine what that child might go through when all your peers are able to access the text or access the math or whatever you're doing in the classroom, but you are not able to. You will eventually start thinking there is something wrong with me or I'm different. Right. And many a times that starts becoming their internal dialogue. They start internalizing these things or, thinking that, oh, I can't read or I can't write. My students have many a times told me, no, why don't you read this for me? I can't read. Or I can't, oh my God, writing is evil. I don't want to do this. And so not only do they form this self-concept as a learner, which obviously gets affected, but they also then start, forming some sort of a reluctance towards learning because they feel like they can't do this. And I mean, that's a very human tendency, right? That happens with us. If we fail at something, we normally don't want to try that or do that. Similarly with kids.
Right. Yeah. And I, as a teacher, I've noticed this with all students, like wherever a student has felt that I'm not good enough at this subject, it starts to impact their motivation to continue learning that subject. And so they don't ask as many questions anymore. They don't raise their hand and take that risk of trying to answer a question.
Yeah.
And often they lose interest in the subject too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree 100%. And I think a lot of it is to also do with the relationship they form with the teacher in the classroom. So right. Subject, yes, is definitely one thing. If you struggle with math, you will dislike math. But it, to a great extent, depends on how the teacher responds to the child's difficulty.
Right.
If the teacher is accommodating, if the teacher is accepting and says, no, you can do it. No, let me figure out another way for you to do it. The child will start developing that mindset that, yes, I feel supported and I can do it. Versus a child who is always, told that you can't do this, or, this is too hard for you. Why don't you take a simpler worksheet? Or you should be doing these simpler sums. No, this is not for you. Will start to think that, yeah, I'm not good enough at this. And my teacher does not appreciate me or support me for what I can do. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And yes, so you've laid out what it feels like for this child. Also for the teacher who's teaching the student who is not reading at the grade level, is now also not showing interest, is not being proactive in asking when they need support. What is the teacher's attitude towards that child, especially if the teacher has already, internally decided that this child has a disability? He won't be able to do it.
So I think there are different ways in which a teacher can respond. One, definitely, there are teachers who are so willing to help all the learners in their classroom and will find some way or the other to support that learner or to figure out how do I support him, or if they themselves don't feel as equipped, they might say, let me read up more on this. Let me talk to a special educator. Let me figure out solutions. I've seen teachers like those as well. But like you said, there are certain section of teachers who may not feel as equipped to work with different learners for whatever reason. Maybe they haven't had the training. And if they sometimes just internally, label the child as having a disability or label the child as a slow learner or ADHD or whatever, it's very possible that the teacher stops trying. Yeah. And I have myself seen that happen, which for me was very disheartening as a special ed teacher when working with my students, because I've seen that when I'd walk into a classroom, say out of 30 students, 27 students are engaged, are working hard, they're doing their work. But 3 of those learners that I work with who have some special educational need are on their own, doing some artwork, roaming around, doing something or the other. And the teacher's attitude might typically be that, ye to karta hi nahi hai. This child doesn't work hard, he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't have a notebook, or whatever other reason. But they may start giving up on the child, or they may think that, okay, at least 27 on 30 of my kids are doing it, right? Fine. If 2, 3 don't do it, beyond the point, how much can I do? So that definitely varies across schools, across, depends on the kind of resources that are in the school, depending on the kind of support a teacher is also getting, right? If a teacher is not feeling motivated, they need to get the right support to move in the right direction. But many of the teachers are too burdened with so many other things that they may not get that support or may not have enough resources.
Right. So, Mahima, what I'm hearing you say is that teachers also need support in addressing different needs of students.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, just to understand the scale of the problem, can you tell us, like in a class of 30 students, how many students are likely to have a learning disability or different need?
Typically, I would say this ranges between anywhere between 10 to 20%. And of course, it can vary across schools, across countries. But yeah, the average you see 10, 12% somewhere, some statistics say 15%. So if you walk into a classroom which is 40 students, typically 3 to 4 or more learners will have different needs, will not be performing at the same grade level. And again, this varies across schools. Yeah.
Okay. So, in a class of 40, a minimum of 4 would have some learning disability. And, some people are of the belief that these students should just be going to a different school. And I would love to know your opinion on this.
I'm trying to figure out how to say this nicely. I am absolutely against that idea. I don't think that any student should be, just based on their perceived abilities, should be made to go to a segregated setting. This is, historically, this is, I feel like it's quite an ancient concept. Yes, we started with segregated schools, or what are known as special schools for kids with disabilities. But now, over the past few decades, we've moved way beyond that. We have moved towards integrating students with disabilities in mainstream schools. And what that means is having all the learners study in the same classroom or in the same environment. But I also realized that the environment really matters, in the sense that we can include students with disabilities in the classroom, we can have them in a mainstream school, but if we're not providing them with what they need, then we're doing injustice, right? Like, we can't have them in the school and then say, oh, but our system is not prepared or not equipped to work with them.
Right.
And I feel like that is where the problem lies. That's where the gap lies currently in our country also. We've moved towards integrating students with disabilities in mainstream or in regular schools, but we may not be at the point where we are catering to each and every child and providing them with what they need in the classroom. And just, one more point to answer your question. I think initially, when I started my first job, I was of the view that, okay, inclusive education is, yes, you include everyone in the classroom, but again, you provide them the environment which is best suited to their needs. So I thought that there will always be some learners, maybe with severe disabilities, who may not be able to study in the mainstream or typical classroom. But when I studied in the US and I took this exceptional course on inclusive education by an excellent professor, he used to say that you won't know until you try. So the first place for any child to be in is the mainstream classroom, regardless of ability. the first place that they should be placed in is a typical mainstream school. And because we don't know until we try, we can't, even before working with the child, we can't say, oh, just because he has that disability, he should not be in this school and he should go to that school. I don't think we can decide anyone's fate like that, right? So, yeah, to answer your question, I totally am against that idea.
Right. And what you said really resonated with me, because you said we can't decide a child's fate like that. And
yeah,
I suppose that is exactly what happens when, at kindergarten or grade 1, you decide, this kid is behind, this kid belongs in a different school. That label will stick for life for that child.
Absolutely.
And as adults, how can we decide that without first giving it a try, like you said?
Yes.
But at the same time, you also said that the first place that the child should begin is the mainstream school. But we should serve justice, which means we must address their needs in that mainstream school. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit about, what does it mean? And is it even possible to provide for needs of all children in a mainstream school? Like what would a classroom like that look like?
So it's interesting you ask that, because I'll share an experience. Again, like I shared before going to the US and before actually studying inclusive education, I did have somewhat a limited view of what it would look like. And I thought, okay, maybe kids with high incidence disabilities such as learning disabilities, ADHD, they can still manage, but kids with sensory impairment or who have severe needs may not be able to manage in a mainstream school. Again, because of the environment. There was this one school in the US, in Massachusetts, which I visited, which was completely inclusive. So I walked into the classroom and there are, say 20, 30 kids. I don't really remember the exact number. But there I saw there must have been kids with invisible disabilities such as learning and attention again. But there was a kid who was severely disabled, who was in a wheelchair. There was a kid who had visual impairment, all studying together in the same classroom. Of course, the difference being they had the resources. So they had 2 to 3 teachers. They had paraprofessionals who were working one-on-one with kids with high needs. So say if there was a child with visual impairment, there was someone right next to them working one-on-one with them. But I'm assuming translating the same curriculum that was happening in the classroom in a way that would suit this child's needs. So I have seen it work. I have seen that it's possible. I've read research on it, all of that. But I'm working towards it. I'm working towards making it a reality. And I wouldn't say that I've seen it happen in India. To an extent, yes, but not to that extent. So yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like it's possible. Is there some part of your question that I missed?
No, well, you've firmly established that it is possible and you've seen it, and you yourself have, been delighted at the fact that it is possible. And you saw this at a school where in one classroom there were children with various needs. There was a child in a wheelchair, there was a visually impaired child, and there were also children with other needs. And you're saying that all of them are learning together, and the whole school ethos is that they all must learn together. And, like the first thing that occurs to me when I hear that is that how amazing it would be if other children, maybe who are not in a wheelchair, who are not visually impaired, when they see these children with them, there's a certain empathy that will be generated even for the others.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, actually, I forgot, but I do know one school in India. I'm sure there are more. Okay, I'm sure there are many more that are very inclusive in nature. But one school that I know for sure is actually a preschool in the college where I studied. So it's a laboratory preschool in the college in a college in Delhi University. And interestingly, it's also a preschool that I attended when I was a little girl. So they have been inclusive for the past several decades. And there you will find kids with all needs studying together in the same classroom. Of course, it's an early childhood setup. It's a preschool, so it looks very different. Maybe some things are easier. Maybe the resources are very different. But again, it is possible there. And I think, like you said, for kids without disabilities, such as when I was attending that school, I think if you send your kids to inclusive schools right from the start, they would have always been exposed to differences and to diversity in development. And then as they grow up, these may not actually seem as differences to them. And so you brought up this excellent point that inclusion not just benefits kids with disabilities, but it hugely benefits kids without disabilities. And I've seen that happen. I've myself experienced that. Like you said, kids definitely become more aware of diversity, of differences, and also they definitely like their social cognition, and meaning how they are socially and how they're emotionally. That also greatly gets, that's also impacted, right? And they do become more empathetic, more aware, and more sensitive. And then these are the kids who will, tomorrow be in workforces, and they will have more inclusive attitudes towards everyone. So, yeah, I think inclusive education is for all.
Wow. So you're actually saying that inclusive education, if it is inclusive of children with all needs, helps everyone. And, like from one perspective that I can think of, I think everyone is disabled in some way or the other, right? Like I'm not very athletically good, and but
Yeah.
I'm good at art. And similarly, somebody else might be really great at math, but somebody else is better at language.
Absolutely.
And so technically, we're all, at different levels of ability. And we all could do with a little more support, and we all could do with a little more love and compassion. And I do see that being put together in a group where we can see these differences and these commonalities, because it is common that all of us have certain disabilities. So being put together in a group where we can all acknowledge, this is something I'm not good at. It creates a safe space. And
yeah, absolutely. I've actually seen that happen with young kids. So again, at my first job, when I'd be working with some specific learners in a classroom, the other kids would always be so curious. And they'd be like, okay, what is in your room? We want to see what she works on with you. Why can't we come with you? And I remember this one specific conversation with a child where she once said, oh, I've heard that he's a special child. And I asked her, okay, what do you mean special child? She said, that's what my teacher told me. And then I asked her, aren't we all special? And she's like, oh, yeah, you're right. But, and then she got, fourth grader, got all confused by the concept of special. But basically through our conversation, she realized that, yeah, we all have strengths and weaknesses, like you said. And I remember her asking me, oh, I also find math difficult. Can I come to you then? Yeah, but I think it definitely creates this, I think being in an inclusive setup reduces that stigma towards kids who are different or who have disabilities, and also creates appreciation towards seeking support and being okay with seeking support, being okay with saying that I'm not good at this and I need help. And I think that's a huge skill in itself that our learners need, as they navigate school, college, and even life. I mean, right? Like, I feel like all of us need that skill to be able to ask for support and help when we need it.
Right, right. No, even as adults, so many of us struggle to articulate that, I'm not good at this. Can you please help me?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some questions coming in, Mahima, and
Okay.
so there's one question about how well does the buddy system work in mainstreaming children of all needs in a classroom?
I feel like, again, there can be pros and cons to it. So, to clarify for the others who are watching us, buddy system typically refers to a practice where, say, if I have different learners in my classroom or kids with disabilities, I may assign a student who I think is more maybe kind and empathetic and maybe even good at studies, as we traditionally say. And I may assign that student to, say, partner up with this child who needs some more support, maybe sit with them, maybe help them with certain skills and give them prompts or something. So I think, so the question is, how well does that work, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have seen some success in it where some kids really, like, I think in younger classrooms, say in primary, like third, fourth, fifth graders, they're all very close and they really care about everyone and they're very inclusive in nature. So they will really, I think, own up to this and say, oh, I'm going to help him. Yeah, sure. And, we'll get this done together. And they'll be very appreciative of that peer and say that, wow, ma'am, today he accomplished this, today he did that. But some cons that I've seen or heard are that, one, maybe we have to realize that they're also a child and we can't always expect that sort of responsibility from a child. We can't always expect the child to always be with one person, sit in the class, be at lunch with that person. They need to have their own social life. They need to make friends with others. So we can't force friendship or force collaboration. Two, sometimes some parents are not okay with it. And some parents may feel like, oh, why is my child always with a child who has a disability? Now, those are certain other issues. There I feel like parents need sensitization also. But still, these are, as teachers or as a school system, we have to think of these as well. And I think my personal belief would be that you create, sorry if I'm taking too much time on one question, but I think my personal belief would be that you create such a collaborative culture in the entire classroom that everyone is okay working with everyone. And you don't necessarily have to assign one buddy just because that child needs a friend or support. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So, you also talked about parent beliefs and the role of parents here. And we have a question about what role do you think parents have in the conversation on having children with special needs sit in the same classroom? What role do the parents of the child with disability have? And what role do the other parents have?
In communicating with their children?
Yes, in communicating with their children, in also providing support to my child as well as somebody else's child. What is the role that parents can play?
I think firstly, I think it's very important for parents to also be aware of and be sensitive towards children and people with disabilities. They need to be aware of what these mean. They need to know that if their child is going to an inclusive school, what would that entail? What would that look like in the classroom? And they need to be okay with it. I feel like if you're not okay and if you're not going to change your mindset, then take your child out of the school, to be very honest. Don't send your child to an inclusive school if you have issues with your child mixing with kids with different needs. So, because many of the times kids pick up attitudes from their parents. So if the parent doesn't have the right mindset, the child will also develop a discriminatory attitude towards kids with different needs. So definitely parents play a huge role in how they talk to their kids about kids with different needs. How do they, if they have a child with special needs, how do they talk to him or her about inclusion? And also, how do they communicate with their own kids about their strengths and weaknesses? Like telling them that it's okay to be bad at something, and telling them that it's okay to maybe just focus on your talents. It's okay if you can't do math, but it's awesome that you can do art, right? So I think parents have a huge role to play in how kids think about themselves and how kids think about other kids. Um,
Right.
I think there was another point that I'm now forgetting. Um, yeah, but I feel like parent sensitization is really important.
Right, right. And if you do remember that point, don't worry about
Yeah.
bringing it whenever it comes up for you.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So and so much of what you're saying is also about generally our learning environments having a growth mindset about everyone, right? And so in my field of social emotional learning, we say that if we have a fixed mindset about whether abilities or intelligence can grow, then just our
Yeah.
belief about that will influence how much we put in.
Yeah.
And whereas if we have a growth mindset, believing that this is my current level of this ability, but I can grow it with effort and practice and using strategies like asking for
Yeah.
support. So
Yeah.
if I have a growth mindset about myself, and then I go to a school where the whole learning environment, the parents, the teachers, everyone is supporting growth rather than, how
Yeah.
quickly did you get the answer or did you get the perfect
Hmm.
answer in perfect time. If growth is
Yeah.
celebrated instead, like how many times did you
Yeah.
try, how many times did you fail but still continue
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah.
So a school like that would be, I think that would be part of an inclusive environment as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Where I think where you appreciate effort more than performance. And that's all what inclusion and that's all what growth mindset is about, right? You look at the effort the child is putting in and not necessarily the performance. However, well, traditionally we are very performance oriented, but I feel like we're gradually moving towards recognizing effort and talent and the investment that kids are putting in.
No, on this topic, I just have to jump in and say this. I was recently leading a workshop for 50 government school principals in Punjab, and we did an exercise in that workshop where we redesigned the report card, and
Okay.
it was on this, right? Like, is there something else we can celebrate instead of
Yeah.
only celebrating, how many marks did the child get in this one test? And the principals came up with such amazing stuff. They came up with, this is the number of times this child asked for support. This is the number of
Hmm.
times the child
Hmm.
failed and still continued trying. Um, and if
Yes.
we can begin to celebrate those things as healthy habits, and actually like have the report card reflect that, like what a cool school to go to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds amazing. And I'm glad you've started work towards that. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we do in special education also. When we're working with kids in one-on-one or in small groups, we're looking at their growth over time. And we're looking at what skills they've gained. And have they become a more independent learner? Have they learned more about themselves as a learner, right? And not so much, okay, where are they at their own grade level? How are they doing with their grade level? I mean, that does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't, but there's so much beyond just performance at your grade level that matters, right? Yeah, agreed.
So, here's another question, Mahima. What do you think are some immediate changes that can be made in existing mainstream schools, regardless of the resources that they have?
Immediate changes, regardless of resources, right?
Yes,
I
this is a
think,
example, you don't get to, this is a regular mainstream school. You don't get to fiddle around too much with the number of resources they have. But what are some immediate changes that they can still make?
I feel like in order to make any change in action, number one, you need a change in mindset. And so that mindset switch or change that is the most crucial to bring about inclusion is understanding that everyone is different. That if I have 30 learners in a classroom, there are 30 different brains and 30 different ways of learning and understanding and perceiving information. I think if we can just move away from that concept of a normal or an average and know that, okay, all my kids are different and my job as an educator is to reach all these 30, 40 kids. And I can't exclude any one of them or two of them. It's not okay to exclude any of them. I think first having that mindset, and then if you develop that mindset and if you think, okay, my task is to reach all 30 or 40 of them, even if they're learning differently, even if they're at different learning levels, you will figure out ways to reach them differently. So the idea, regardless of resources, is that you keep the goal same for all learners. Everyone has to reach here, but the paths that they take to that learning can look different. So I have to teach all my students addition, but whether they do that through a worksheet, whether they do that through concrete objects, whether they do that through a video or they physically play with their friends and figure out how this works, that can be different for each child. And so I think one thing that educators can definitely do is thinking of how to present that same information in different ways. Even if they don't need to have a projector or a screen or something for that. But if they can develop just multiple ways of presenting the same information, not having one worksheet for everyone or one particular way, I think that will start engaging more and more learners. And that will increase the motivation of many students rather than just having to sit and copy from the blackboard.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, I think just starting to think about how we can provide more options and provide more flexibility in the curriculum. So if I have to give another example, if you are asking your students to write a 3-paragraph essay on something, or they're doing a research in history and they're writing an essay, we don't need to give them one topic. We can give them a bunch of topics. We can give them 5, 10 to select from. We can give them an 11th option saying, you pick your own or you make your own, right? Like how you can pick your own toppings. So I think those things can be incorporated everywhere. You can give options in everything that you do. That's what I think.
Wow, right. So, not only are we saying that like one chapter, let's say one chapter on addition can be presented in multiple ways by the teacher, but also students should be allowed to respond to that learning stimulus in different ways. So
absolutely,
I as a student should be able to present my learning verbally or in writing or through using concrete objects. And as long as I've understood the concept of addition, it shouldn't really matter the form in which I've presented it.
Right, absolutely. So it depends on the learning goal. It depends on the goal that we have set. Is my goal for the child to understand French Revolution? Or is my goal for the child to write an essay on French Revolution? There can be 10 different ways a child can understand the French Revolution, right? They don't necessarily have to write an essay. So it depends on what goals or learning targets you've set. Based on that, you can provide as many options for them to, one, like you said, access the material, two, express their knowledge. Our assessments have typically been very rigid, have been, paper, pen, and you have to write all the answers. But why can't we think of assessments creatively? Why can't we think of 5, 7 different ways of doing assessments and let the learners pick what works best for them?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to hear a, real life story of one of your students where you've tried using some of these practices. And um, did using these practices actually influence the child's learning?
Okay. So,
can you think of an example? I know I'm putting you on the spot, so.
Okay. So, one very, very basic aspect of inclusion that I think I've talked about through this live also, and that I definitely believe in is not expecting the child to conform to your norms or standards that you've set, but figuring out how can we change our environment, in the sense, how can we change our curriculum, or again, like we just talked about, how can I change my learning material to suit the child's needs best, right? And I think that's something I learned early on in my career with one of my students. I was very new, just started my first job after college, and I was asked to work with this boy in third grade. Very interesting child, whose notebooks were always empty, who didn't want to sit in one place for too long, who wanted to run around the school and do whatever he wanted to. And I started working with him, and at that stage, he was not writing a 3-letter word. He would run and hide under the table. He would run around the school, whatever, make me feel like I'm torturing that kid. But he would just not want to write or want to do any sort of traditional work that his third grade class expected him to do. So this is a kid who was not...
Need, if you'll let us know.
So at that point, so when I started, he was not diagnosed with any sort of learning need, which is again the case for so many kids in our country and across so many schools. You don't always know what the child is diagnosed with or whether they have a learning disability, but they're not reading. So he wasn't reading or writing at the grade level. He wasn't doing math at the grade level, but a bright kid who loves to talk, who has brilliant ideas, but just not accessing curriculum at that age. And so my job as a special ed teacher was to bridge that gap, right? I'm supposed to work on his reading and writing skills. But this boy just won't listen. This boy won't sit. He's not interested in writing BAT or anything. And soon after, I realized that I have to change my practice to align with his needs and his interests. I cannot expect him to do the same thing that other kids are doing in the classroom, because he's not like the typical learner, and that is okay. So I found out more about what his interests are, and I started designing all of my material around his interests. For example, nature was something that he was interested in. He was really good at art. So we started elaborating all our learning activities and incorporating his strengths. And the moment we did that, he started enjoying coming to me. He formed a rapport with me. He started sitting in one place and working on his assignments, only because he was also getting to do something that he enjoyed and loved. And 2 years later, that boy was writing his own stories. He was writing 1-page, 2-page long stories. From not wanting to write a 3-letter word to writing stories. All of this changed because someone, and not just me, but others as well, recognized that we can't expect him to conform, but we can change our practice to align with his needs and his interests. And this is just one example, but like we discussed previously about providing options and providing a flexible curriculum, this is what can be done in the classroom. If you design your curriculum in a manner that there is flexibility, you can cater to different learner needs and interests, all your learners will be more engaged and motivated because they'll find some piece or the other that resonates with them. And so in that case, you wouldn't have to fix the child or figure out how do I solve this child's problem, but you'll figure out what is wrong in my curriculum, what is wrong in my teaching strategy that I can change.
Right.
So that all my learners are engaged. Yeah, that's just one example that comes to my mind.
That's beautiful. And what you said is that you paid attention to what he was interested in. And one of our comments is also, acknowledging that the teacher needs to imbibe an attitude to include others, and inclusion means being interested in the other person. And I find this concept so
Lovely.
beautiful, because if we're just simply interested to get to know the other person, what they're, what they love doing, what they're interested in, what they're good at, then we can begin to tailor the curriculum to, include some of that for them.
Absolutely.
And
No, that's a lovely comment.
Yeah. And this, what you just shared, this is a child who wasn't able to write a 3-letter word. And in 2 years, with the belief of teachers, and teachers who cared enough to find out what he is interested in, and teachers who actually, integrated his interests into the English reading and writing program. With all of that, he's now writing stories by himself. It gives me a lot of hope to hear this.
Agreed. No, I think teacher engagement and teacher interest that's where it all starts. That's where change will start, once teachers are engaged and actually want to work towards change and are actually interested in getting to know their learners. You can't, you would understand, you would agree with this, being an educator. You can't possibly work with your learners wholeheartedly until and unless you actually know them. And I think that's definitely a key piece for inclusion as well.
Right. So Mahima, we have just about 5 minutes left, and I'd love to, briefly hear from you about what is ahead for your work personally. What's ahead for you?
It's something that I keep evaluating from time to time and keep asking myself, I think every couple of months. But I think over all these past 5-6 years of working in this field, one crucial thing that I've identified for me to work on is to work with teachers, to collaborate with teachers and to work with them or train them, or work towards teacher capacity building as much possible. So whether I do that as a special education teacher in a school, that's the role I'm in currently, or in future, I may not be directly working with kids, but I definitely want to stay involved in a school setting with teachers, because I feel, like I just said, that's where the change starts. Teachers are the people working with kids in the classroom every day. And so I feel like if we have to have a larger impact, or we have to ensure that inclusive education is implemented across schools, across divisions, we have to work with teachers, and we have to be with them. I'm not saying that we have to tell them what to do, but we have to be with them, understanding their challenges, and working with them alongside. Yeah, I feel like that's a key piece for me.
100% work with teachers and make this a reality. And lastly, what is one action you recommend that our listeners take in their lives? We may or may not have children with special needs in our lives, but still, what is one action that you recommend that we take?
I think, again, one key message that I want our listeners to take away from this talk today is moving away from the concept of a normal. I know we've been brought up and socialized with the idea that, oh, this is normal, and anything that doesn't fit that normal is different or strange or weird or abnormal even. And there have been so many times where I've heard not just teachers, but other people also refer to people without disabilities as normal people, right? And it's just because we don't know any better. It's because that's the term we've always heard. So it comes to us, we say, oh, this is for normal people, or normal kids can do this. And I'll just say it really irks me. So one recommendation for everyone who's listening to us tonight will be, please try and refrain from using this term normal. Because when you say normal kids or normal people, you're in a way signifying that the others are abnormal or
Sure,
there's
but
something wrong with them.
you help us out. If we don't say normal and abnormal, what is a different word that we could use?
So in the field, what we say is typical learners or typically developing people. There's another term that people often use called neurotypical, like neurologically they're typical, right? But you can just refer to them as typical learners or typically developing people, and that is okay. Yeah, so I think I would suggest that that be more mindful of the terms that you're using. Whenever you tend to say normal, correct yourself, correct others, but try and just be more sensitive towards how we address people with disabilities, because they're just like anyone else. We're all different and we're all beautiful. And like Vrinda said earlier, we're all abled and disabled in some ways. And I think understanding that is at the heart of inclusion, right?
Yeah. No, and I love that. That's definitely something I'm taking on from this talk. Typical and atypical. Way lesser judgment in that terminology than in normal and abnormal. So and if we can take away this judgment that kids have to go through right from childhood, I think that's already a really big step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, remove the judgment from the observation, as someone once told me.
Beautiful. So, Mahima, this has been such a pleasure having you talk about this really important issue. And I am just so moved that this issue is not really about your atypical students alone, but also about everyone. And thank you for showing us that that's connected, that, when we're being inclusive of students who have atypical needs, we're actually being inclusive of everyone. So thank you for helping us see that. And and I really want to thank everyone who's joined us with your comments and your participation and your questions. Thank you, fomonomore, for having us and giving us this platform to share these ideas and learn from experts like Mahima. Once again, do follow her blog, Value Ed, on Instagram. You can find the link in the comments section. And I'm from the Center for Social Emotional Learning. Follow us as well right here on Facebook. Would you like to say any last words, Mahima?
I just want to really thank you, Vrinda, and thank fomonomore for collaborating with me and inviting me to talk about something that is so important and something that I love talking about. I never get tired of talking about inclusive education. So thank you, and I had a great time talking with you. And of course, thank you to everyone who has been watching us and who's commented or posted questions. And yeah, let's stay in touch and continue working towards making this world more inclusive.
With you on that, sister.
Yes.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.